Today, I have a special guest, U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett. Tim is a Republican from Tennessee. Before my interview with Congressman Burchett, I'd like to talk about my recent appearance on the Sean Ryan Show. In the comments section, I took some heat for statements I made about the respective theologies of QAnon and woke and how they divide Americans. I believe that many of the comments were trolls and bots whose progenitors don't like to see me on such a large platform. But I also realized that many of Sean's audience are conservatives, and they took umbrage at me for comparing QAnon and woke. And I was accused of being a contemptible, dreaded liberal. I should mention that I've been swimming in the cesspool of American politics for 22 years. And given the corruption that I've encountered, I currently find it impossible to vote for a Republican or Democrat. So I don't have a dog in that fight. And my beliefs are an amalgam of conservative and progressive. The right and the left have become increasingly balkanized by our politicians and media, and Americans have become prey to divide and conquer. And as I said, the theologies of QAnon and woke have exacerbated that ever-widening chasm. QAnon was ostensibly initiated by a high-ranking government official, but in actuality, it was most likely the cynical creation of Jim and Ron Watkins. According to QAnon theology, the Democratic political elite are Satanists who are abducting and killing children. And Donald Trump will save the children if he is elected president in 2020. Over the course of Trump's presidency, none of the many perpetrators in the Jeffrey Epstein child trafficking network were even arrested, with the exception of Ghislaine Maxwell. In fact, 5 Democratic members of the House's Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Carolyn Maloney, Jackie Speier, Lois Frankel, Jamie Raskin, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, attempted to investigate the malfeasance involved in the Epstein case in December of 2019. But their investigation was apparently quashed. So 5 Democratic members of the House's Committee on Oversight and Accountability attempted to seek justice on behalf of Epstein's numerous victims, which belies QAnon theology. 4 years later, on December 11th, 2023, Congressman Burchett wrote a letter to James Comer, who was the new chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, requesting, quote, documents you deem appropriate and necessary to determine who are among the scumbags Epstein counted as clients and highlight any who are or previously were government officials. Burchett's appeal for an investigation also went nowhere. Despite the efforts of 5 federal representatives on the House's Committee on Oversight and Accountability and Representative Burchett, the Epstein procurers and perpetrators were never brought to justice. Extreme elements of woke theology on the left have further widened the chasm between the right and the left. Incarcerated men have, in fact, identified themselves as women and have sexually assaulted women prisoners. Moreover, men identifying as women in various sporting competitions is also incongruous. Post-pubescent males have 15 times the amount of circulating testosterone as post-pubescent females, which translates into a 20 to 12% performance advantage in running and swimming and a 20% advantage in jumping events. The vast majority of the people on the right don't believe that the Democratic elites are Satanists abducting children. And the vast majority of people on the left don't believe that men should be incarcerated in women's jails and prisons. And they also don't believe that men should compete as women in sporting competitions. However, these extreme examples of the right and the left have been accentuated by politicians and the media, further driving a seemingly irreconcilable wedge between the right and the left. As of December 2024, the congressional approval rating was 13%, which demonstrates that 80% of Americans do not think that the Congress is acting in their best interests. The right blames congressmen and women on the left for many of the problems that are occurring and arising in our society, and vice versa. Representative Burchett and I have differing views on various policies, but we're in 100% agreement on various policies too. And it would be great if Americans on the right and left started focusing on what we have in common instead of our dissimilarities. Congressman Burchett is for term limits and government transparency. And I'm definitely for term limits and government transparency. Congressman Burchett has also focused on extricating our military from irrational and disastrous foreign policies. In December of 23, Congressman Burchett introduced House Resolution 6586, opposing financial or material support by foreign countries to the Taliban. When the United States withdrew from Afghanistan in August of 2021, U.S. troops were ordered to leave behind $7 billion worth of military equipment that ended up with the Taliban. According to an August 2023 World Bank report, the UN has purchased, transported, and transferred $2.9 billion to Afghanistan since August of 2021. The bill that Burchett introduced, H.R. 6586, passed in the House, but Republicans and Democrats in the Senate have opposed his resolution. In 2021, Congressman Burchett voted for H.R. 256, which was to repeal the 2002 authorization for use of military force against Iraq. The United States had spent approximately $775 billion in Iraq because of the lies told by the Bush II administration. H.R. 256 passed in the House by a margin of 268 to 161. Approximately 100 representatives didn't even vote on the bill. 219 Democrats voted for H.R. 256, and Congressman Burchett was one of only 49 Republicans who voted for getting us out of Iraq. So he bucked the majority of Republicans with his vote. In 2023, Congressman Burchett voted for Congressional Resolution 21, which directed President Joe Biden to remove U.S. troops from the disastrous war in Syria within 180 days. The resolution was defeated by a margin of 321 to 103. Congressman Burchett and I had a brief discussion about the deplorable congressional approval rating, and then he discussed how his congressional colleagues were being compromised in honey traps. A blog entitled "The Problem with the Right and the Left" will accompany this podcast. Welcome to the Nick Bryant Podcast. Today, I have a special guest, Congressman Tim Burchett from Tennessee. How you doing today, Congressman?
I'm good, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on my podcast. Tennessee is really getting pounded very, very hard from Helene. How's that going?
Well, fortunately for my district, the district I represent, that it was not hit that hard as like a wind event, maybe, and some rain. It's Upper East, the district that's connected to Medina Harshburgers. It's up on the border. It came down North Carolina through those the mountains, and then the people down below are the Tennesseans living in those hollers, and it just, there's nothing recorded like this in the past. They call it 1,000-year flood. It just flash flood, and whole communities are gone. People's, not just their houses, but the property their houses are on is just gone. It's just like it's from a flat area to a hillside kind of thing. And that it's devastating.
And I've heard that FEMA has been somewhat inadequate in addressing those problems.
Well, there's a lot of rumors out there on things going on. I don't want to spread any of that, but
Okay.
I just don't have a lot of faith. I am the federal government. I don't have a lot of faith in the federal government. I think that they need to send the money to the states, disband a lot of these federal agencies, and allow them to handle it. Case in point, Franklin Graham's organization, Samaritan's Purse, I think they ought to have access similar to what the Red Cross does. You've got these intertwined government bureaucracies, and to me, I think that is a very dangerous and wasteful situation in some cases. And, you've got, as of last Friday, I talked to one community leader, elected official, that told me that they just then had contact with FEMA. And there's areas of North Carolina, I know a little church up in Upper East Tennessee has access to a member with a helicopter, and they've been flying in stuff almost daily over the border into North Carolina to an area that hasn't received anything. So I guess it's a lot of Monday morning armchair quarterbacking, and you can't really prepare for something like this. But I think in the future, we need to start looking in that direction.
I've been following your career lately, and last year you proposed HR 6586, which was to have the United States stop giving money to the Taliban after we left them with $7 billion worth of military hardware. But unbelievably, you had people that fought against that resolution.
Yeah, and it's still hasn't passed the Senate from what I understand. So yeah, there's a real problem there. Money, millions of dollars every week are going to them. It's not too big of a circuitous route to get to them. It's there's money that flows into these groups, NGOs, and other places. I think I'm not, and on this one, it's a little different, and the money ends up getting to the Taliban in a pretty direct manner, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, it is ridiculous that we should even be, you and I should not be having this argument. And then why is it not a national news story that the Senate is not taking it up? Why is it not a national news story that Chuck Schumer is not pounding on his desk that why are we paying the Taliban money?
We spent God knows how much money overthrowing the Taliban, and we left them with $7 billion worth of military equipment, and we're giving them millions of dollars, and yet that should be a slam dunk for our Congress.
Why is the national media not on it? I think it just show the ineptness or ineptitude of the current administration. Well, they're ahead with them. That's why they won't go after fentanyl, because they'll have to show that they got a problem at the border. Why are they not sticking a mic in the president's face every day saying, or Kamala Harris, why are you giving money to the Taliban?
And you also voted against in 2021, you voted against the use of military force in Iraq, which Americans, the media and government sold 80% of Americans the war in Iraq, but now Americans, by the vast majority, want out of Iraq, and yet you have to vote for bills like that. That's
well,
kind of mind-boggling.
It's the corrupt nature of Washington, D.C., and we need to clean up both parties, really. I mean, people got to get some guts in Washington, and then we got to have people voting with some common sense and voting some of these people out, but they're not doing a very good job of it when 15% of the population votes.
And again, you voted for Congressional Resolution 21, which directed Biden to remove U.S. troops from Syria within 80 days. And again, that was defeated in the House.
Yep. Well, why are we there? Our military fighting men take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Tell me what part of the Constitution applies to a foreign country in the Middle East. I mean, let's just admit it. We're in the Middle East for oil. That's it. We're there for oil. You know,
we're not democracy building.
we do a poor job of lying to the public, I think.
Well, you know, we had dinner about a month ago, and I said to you that the congressional approval rating was 13%, and you kind of looked at me kind of with some incredulity. You were surprised that it was that high. Yeah. And I'm here to report that since then it's dropped a point. So it's down to 12%.
Yeah, well, I suspect the rest of them thought they were going to get a kickback or something from Congress that voted and said that they had a favorable attitude towards Congress, because it's pathetic. And you know, everybody always asks me what was my biggest surprise when I got to Washington, and I said my biggest surprise was that I was not surprised. we are on a greased pole to hell right now. 35 trillion in debt, every 100 days at another trillion, and nobody wants to address it. They're going to support these endless wars. As long as they're not getting killed, they don't care. It's just portfolio building is what we're not democracy building, we're portfolio building.
That's a good expression for it, because I've kind of wondered, since democracy building really isn't our objective, portfolio building, though, that should be, that sounds good.
Yeah, case in point, when Biden said we're going to send our missile defense system to Ukraine, lo and behold, you had members of both parties that had bought stock 2 weeks prior to that in the missile defense company, because America had to replenish theirs in a no-bid contract. So billions of dollars in their stock went up proportionately.
Our lawmakers seem to have a lot of luck when it comes to stocks.
Yeah, we need to outlaw private ownership of stocks. You ought to make a sacrifice when you go to Congress. You know, my $9,000 portfolio, my buddy Tommy Seiler, I'm pointing in the direction of his office. He manages my $9,000 mutual fund very well. And that's where your money ought to be, is in a mutual fund, if you're going to do that in the market.
9,000. I mean, you're pulling down some big bucks in Congress to have a $9,000 portfolio.
Yeah, well, it's easy for you to say. Your daughter isn't a barrel racer. You don't live on a farm, and I'm just shoveling money out the door. But I love it. I'm okay with it.
Nancy Pelosi has done very well.
She has, and they're actually brokers that follow her trades. But she hasn't done the best. There's some that have done and have done a whole lot better than her. So I can't really point the finger all at her, although she does exceptionally well. There is no question.
I've noticed that. You first caught my attention with a letter that you wrote to the House Committee on Oversight. And you wanted an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. And actually, you called these people that were colluding with Jeffrey Epstein scumbags. And I am the director of an organization called Epstein Justice. And we're, as I've told you, we want a commission with two simple things. We want to know why the government has covered up this child trafficking, and we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. And you wrote this letter, and I really resonated with it. Why do you think nothing has been done by the government with regards to that?
Because we're compromised, pure and simple. you've got some of these dirt bags and elected office and officials that have taken part in some of this awful behavior, and they've it's the honeypot, you know. They get them, and then you always wonder why good conservatives vote for horrible legislation occasionally, or good liberals vote for something conservative. I think it's because they've been caught in some situation like that, and somebody's whispered in their ear, you know, man, we don't need this stuff out. You need to help. If you can help us on this bill, I can, you know, make that go away. But it never goes away. It's a temporary fix, because they're just going to keep hanging over them for the rest of their, you know, they've done business with the devil, and now they're going to face the consequences.
Well, it just so happens that I've written 3 books on political blackmail. So I know a little bit about it myself, but it was really refreshing to hear. I've been talking about political blackmail since 22 years. And a lot of people haven't listened to me. A friend of mine was an editor at a major magazine in New York City, and his boss did not believe that there was political blackmail. We're talking the editor-in-chief of a major magazine did not believe that. It's kind of mind-boggling. And with Americans, we have the congressional approval rating is 12%. And a lot of people think it's money that is being moved around. And special interest money is certainly important, but the blackmail equation is never, ever talked about.
Never is, because it's done at the highest levels, and I think it's done a lot, and you know, they never call it in because they get somebody at a low level and they think if they move up. Case in point, we have a former member of the ethics committee that had a very close relationship with a Chinese spy of the opposite sex, and they were allowed to stay on the intelligence committee. Our biggest enemy outside of debt is China, who happens to hold a lot of our debt. So, and that was permitted. So you have a line of people that are compromised, and they're utilizing it, and they utilize it very well. They utilize it very well, because you don't see really any big change on anything in Washington, and especially with China. I mean, they're buying our farmland, they're buying property, large tracts up there in Tennessee. I can't even get a bill through where they're using our genetic information from these ancestry.com, where they buy that genetic information from them. You know, they're developing a genome, if you will, which is just tracking of your genetic material of Americans. So they, in fact, are working on, I was told by more than one source, I think it was even printed in maybe the Wall Street Journal, that they were working on a genetic defect, if you will, that could be infected into the American population, where, say, childbearing age women would not be able to produce children, something like that. And yet you can't even get the bill through. Again, where is the national media? I just feel like the compromising has gone on so long, and it's so deep that you've just got a lot going on. And it's at different levels. It's not just with sex, things like that. You got committee chairmen who won't move bills because their staffers are uncomfortable with it. The reason their staffers are uncomfortable with it is, I suspect, they've been going on some trips or hanging out at the bar or doing some things that they shouldn't have with some members of that lobbying community, I'll just say, and they stop it.
I've been looking at this for 22 years, and this is what I've noticed about people who I have surmised are compromised. They invariably vote with their constituency, but occasionally markers are called in, and they have to vote, and it's against their constituency. And it's quite salient. But yet, because this has not been addressed, their constituency doesn't know why their representative is voting against what they believe.
Well, and two, I would say that I'd submit to you that a lot of the times, maybe not the majority, but a lot of the times, they don't know that their person has voted against them. Case in point, an amendment that looks um, fairly benign, maybe to create an error or something, a typographical error, but in fact, in reality, it does more than that. And so I mean, they don't want to necessarily burn their contact because they'd have to recruit, move somebody else up through the ranks to get that. So I think they do that a lot, and it's calculated too. I think it's the moves aren't just reckless out in front of everybody. Generally, it gets out when it's out of hand. When it gets out of hand, that's when they have to burn their contact. But it's most of the time, I think it's done in such a way that well, for instance, bills aren't even taken up. If a chairman, I can't even get a bill the bill on the genetic material, I can't even get that even heard in the committee.
And you came out last December and you said this, and I'm sure you took a lot of heat for it. You talked about the honey traps.
Yep, I did. I caught a lot of grief on it, and oddly enough, the next week they busted a Chinese prostitution ring in Washington D.C. If you remember,
Yes.
And they said their client list included government contractors, which to me was a scary. It put them in place to in effect trigger the honey trap because they're the ones who'd have the contact with the Congress people. It said prominent members of the community and elected officials. And the next day that story went away. What happened? Where is the black book? Who are those elected officials?
I wrote a book with someone who ran a gay escort service in Washington, D.C. It's called Confessions of a D.C. Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail. And he was providing escorts, and this is mid 1980s. He was providing like $20,000 to $25,000 worth of escorts to one of the CIA assets whose home was wired for audiovisual blackmail. And he really brings, because usually when we talk about blackmail, we're looking at it from 20,000 feet, but he brings you face to face with the concrete machinations of blackmail. And it's a thriving business in Washington, D.C.
I'd say it is, and like I said, it's not always sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's getting somebody a no-show job, somebody's wife and or girlfriend, possibly both, a job within, a six-figure job, no-show job for somebody is an easy thing when you're talking about somebody who has a multi-billion-dollar contract. And I just, we fill out all these ethical forms, and today I had my mandatory ethics training, and it was good. It had good points to it, and I'm not knocking it, but as a lawyer told me one time, all fences and locks do is keep out honest people. The crooks are going to figure out the way around it. And when I was in the state legislature, the lobbyists helped write the ethics laws.
When you came out and said that last December about the honeypots, at that point, I thought, well, either he's very clean or he's going to be out of a job very quickly. So you're still standing. Congratulations. That indicates to me that you're pretty clean.
Well, I got an election coming up. I would hate to ever disappoint my wife and or my daughter, who both currently love me. So I would hate to disappoint them.
Well, I really want to thank you for coming on the Nick Bryant podcast.
Thank you, brother. And I appreciate the books you read, and they're they're interesting to say the least. And I'd say they probably are just documentaries, you know.
Well, I'm just looking for the truth, and this is where I ended up in the cesspool of Washington, D.C.
Well, it is a cesspool. You know, they always want to call it a swamp, and I've corrected a lot of people. It's not a swamp. A swamp is a cool little ecosystem that God created that filters water and provides life for just a whole circle of things. And Washington D.C. is just a sewer. I mean, it's just no oxygen and no light. It all flows in and nothing flows out. It is stagnated, and we can do better. Well, I would encourage people to get out and vote.
I wanted to ask you one more question. You've been involved with UFOs.
Yes, sir.
What what are your thoughts about that?
Well, to me, I have my own thoughts about little green men and flying saucers, and that changes almost daily. But my concern is, what are we spending tens of millions of dollars on that the government tells us don't exist, but yet when we get reports from them on the sightings or craft, the reports are heavily redacted. It looks like somebody shot them with a 12-gauge shotgun at close range because there is nothing there. They take everything out. And when I have the best pilots in the world tell me, you know, this thing was, he did his hand like this, he said, Tim, that thing was 14 feet from my canopy. You know, I have a hard time believing some little arrogant bureaucrat with a man bun laughing at me, telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. And then we ask them about some specific instances that we don't have that data. Or I haven't been able to analyze that data. You know, the Bible talks about arrogance, and it says, professing yourself to be wise, you became a fool. And I think we've got a lot of fools in Washington, D.C.
Well, there's an Eastern proverb that says a fool who thinks he is a fool is, let us say, wise. But a fool who thinks he is wise is hugely a fool. And I think we have some major, huge fools in
Yes,
our
sir.
political system.
Yes, sir. I just have a hard time thinking that hundreds, if not thousands, of people have orchestrated something that 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 doesn't exist to convince people that it does exist. I just have a hard time with that. And if they don't exist, then all these departments need to quit spending millions of dollars on something. And why does one department on record come out and say they have a crash retrieval program? What are they retrieving?
Uh, that's a very good question. What are they? Probably military hardware that we left in Afghanistan.
Yeah, yeah,
That's top secret that we don't want the Taliban to get.
yeah. You'd think somebody didn't have a can of gasoline and a match, but that's the brains we have running Washington.
Well, thank you for so much for being a voice of integrity in our
Well, thank
political
you.
system at the federal level.
And I'll tell you, you're not going to get anywhere in Washington, D.C. Saying anything good about Tim Burchett, all right? So I have a very long list of very powerful enemies, and probably will get longer here if I'm reelected.
Well, the thing about it is, it shows that you've stood up to the machine.
Yes,
And the
sir.
fact that you've stood up to the machine and made it this far is quite impressive.
Well, thank you. I don't know about all that. I had very good parents. They were pretty cool people, and they were they loved this country, and I just don't. I'm just afraid we're going to lose our country if we don't make some changes quick.
We've got really good people on the right, and we've got really good people on the left. And I always say this, and then we end up with sociopaths, psychopaths, and narcissists in our political system. And it's very unfortunate because there's so many, as I said, good people on the right and the left that could give us a government that Americans really deserve.
Yes, sir.
And you're a start. And I hope that more politicians at the national level can have your integrity and be as honest as you've been.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
And have yourself a great night, Congressman.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the podcast. And please holler at me the next time you're up around Capitol Hill.
And thank you for being on the podcast.
You got it, brother.
Bye.